Hey everyone, I am Lindsay Rousseau. I am the Media Affairs Director for Continue to Serve. We are an organization that formed, if you are not familiar, we formed on June 21st, 2020, when the peaceful protesters gathered in Lafayette Square in DC were tear gassed and pepper sprayed in order to make way for a photo op for at the time, President Donald Trump. We have done many things in the time, since then. We went dormant and we are back now. But the main thing about us, though, is that our oath is to the Constitution. And we remind all of our fellow veterans and service members that your oath was to the Constitution, not one ideal, not one religion, not one person in office. And that's why we're here. And today we are so excited to be joined by these panel of, I will call them absolutely experts, in this in dealing with issues of dissent within the military and what it means to be given an order that you feel is legally, morally, or ethically wrong. And I'm just going to go around the room and let everybody introduce themselves in the order in which I see them. First up, we have James Brownham.
Hi, I'm James. I'm a solo attorney located in Oklahoma City, and I'm a part of the steering committee of the Military Law Task Force, the National Lawyers Guild. I've been involved in defending service members in courts martial, administrative separation boards, and other such things since 2006. And I'm really excited to be a part of this presentation. I think it's really important that service members understand their rights and know the boundary lines, but also have the empowerment of knowing what they can do.
Great. And then Kathleen Gilbert.
Hi, I am the executive director of that military law task force of the National Lawyers Guild and have been working with the task force long enough to get gray hairs. We are generally concerned about the rights of service members and also about military policies that are unfriendly to other nations and the world, so that we've had over the years many opportunities to support people refusing illegal orders, people dissenting within the military, using their rights to speak out or to demonstrate. That's pretty much who I am. I make trouble for DOD.
And someone who knows a lot about making trouble. Let's move on to Brad Berkowitz.
Hello, everybody. Great to be here today. I did 20 years and 28 days in the Navy, retired in 2006, did the government contractor thing in DC. I worked for JIDO, and then I finished up as a program manager working for Department of Homeland Security. So I believe he put Kristi Noem. I think that's the nomination. I think over that, which is just mind-boggling. But as well, I started a coalition when the election results came out, and it's called the BBB Crew Coalition. And the three Bs are my nickname from the boxing world, Bad Brad Berkowitz Coalition. And what it is forming a community across the United States. Right now, we have 49 states on board. And our first goal is to move humanity forward while democracy goes backwards under Trump. I have several veterans in my organization that are very scared about their benefits and what's going to happen with, as I call them, Leon Musk and Vivek making recommendations to cut, disability payments and the whole gamut. As well, I host a show where I have a lot of different type of people, politicians, business people, celebrities, all that are on our side, on the right side of history, called the Bad Brad Berkowitz Show. It's on YouTube. But meeting David last month and your mission statement and what you guys do, I'm very interested in continuing forward with your group because I like what you stand for. Great. And that's why I'm here today.
Thank you, Brad. And Chris Lombardi.
Hi, my name is Chris. I've been doing this for almost as long as Kathy, but I started doing this working as on the staff member for a conscious objector group that doesn't exist anymore. But I met Kathy that way, and I learned that in doing that work that there wasn't that different. I wasn't that different from the service members I was talking to. Forgive my speech impediment. Service members I was talking to, and that they had joined to be part of something important, and so would I. And the values that they signed up to uphold were not that dissimilar than my values. And I ended up writing this book. I ain't watched anymore. It took me 20 years to write, but it's John Hutto is one of the last people in it, last voices you hear, and it starts out with the Revolutionary War. This history of this stuff is long.
Yeah.
But
yeah, thank you, Chris. And you just mentioned our final panelist, Jonathan Hutto, who has been in the ground resisting for a very long time.
Lindsay, always a joy to be reconnected with you. Not reconnected, just to connect with you. We're eternally connected. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Awesome. Name is Jonathan Hutto, Jonathan Wesley Hutto Sr. I'm a long distance struggler, as Lindsay alluded to. I'm a Navy veteran. I'm a human rights practitioner, organizer. I strive and struggle every day to be a revolutionary, one who works for change no matter where I find myself. I'm honored and humbled to be here today with you. Looking forward to sharing with you what we've learned from our practicing and from our risk taking within the military, particularly within the active duty ranks. Also, to learn from those persons on the line today, especially the active duty, reserve, or guard, in terms of what can be done at this particular hour. Lastly, we do struggle to understand the world. We do struggle to come up with the right, or not the right, but what is the most pertinent theories or pressing questions. But most importantly, the people on this line are people working to change the conditions within which we find ourselves. I end it there, pass it back to Lindsay.
Yeah.
Honored and humbled to be here.
Thank you so much. And thank you all. So obviously, when talking about active duty service members, they are beholden to a lot of rules and rights and responsibilities that are different from civilian people. But within that, they do still have rights. James, let's start with you. Just can you explain to us, what exactly is an illegal order? We've heard about UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice, but we also know there's things like the Geneva Convention. What exactly is an illegal order? And, what are some things that can protect a service member? And of course, everyone else, please chime in if you have thoughts.
Sure. Well, a few things. One is the legal basis for the idea of the defense of not obeying an unlawful order. And another way of framing this. In other words, if an order is given, is it lawful or not? And then if it is unlawful, what do you do about it? So, well, the first question is lawfulness, and there's really two places that give us the foundation for this. One is the Geneva Convention itself, which states that service members are not required to follow unlawful orders, and in fact could be punished for violating them in certain circumstances. In the U.S. military context, our primary thing we're dealing with is the Rule for Court Martial 916. And by the way, the rules for court martial, the military, as it always does not make these things easy to find. It's in a document called the Manual for Courts Martial. And we'll put a link. I know there'll be a link shared later, but it's at jsc.defense.gov. You go to the current rules and regulations section. And from there, look, you can go right there to find the Manual for Courts Martial. Within that is the rules for court martial. And the rules for court martial do not only just deal with procedural issues, they also deal with some substantive issues, and such as Rule 916. So I'm going to read just a little blurb from this because I think it's important to unpack this a little bit. So this is what it says in Rule 916. It begins by saying, in general, defenses includes any special defense, which, although not denying that the accused committed the objective acts constituting the offense charged, denies wholly or partially criminal responsibility for those acts. In layperson terms, it means if a defense exists, the crime does not exist. In this case, of course, the crime would be disobeying an order. The question is, what is their defense if it's unlawful? And that takes us then, if you jump down in Rule 916 to Part D, Delta. And here's what it says. Obedience to orders. It is a defense to any offense that the accused was acting pursuant to orders unless the accused knew the orders to be unlawful, or a person of ordinary sense and understanding would have known the orders to be unlawful. By the way, that last part might be familiar if you're familiar with the Cali case back in the Vietnam era. And the issue there was that the court held that any person of ordinary sense and understanding would know it's unlawful to slaughter civilians. So there's also a little bit of discussion provided in the manual for courts martial right below that. Let me read this as well, because it highlights both some of the parameters, but also one of the pitfalls of this. It says, ordinarily, the lawfulness of an order is decided by the military judge, see RCM 801 Echo. An exception might exist when the sole issue is whether the person who gave the order in fact occupied a certain position at the time. An act performed pursuant to a lawful order is justified, see RCM 916 Charlie. An act performed pursuant to an unlawful order is excused unless the accused knew it to be unlawful, or a person of ordinary sense and understanding would have known it to be unlawful. So in practical terms, what that means is that service members, when given an order, have to make a legal judgment. And this is kind of bonkers, in my opinion, because if a service member makes the wrong legal judgment, they could be punished for it. This is the problem here. In other words, the burden of proof is on the defendant to prove the defense exists, not upon the government to prove that it doesn't exist. And so it needs to be really clear cut. It needs to be abundantly clear that the order is unlawful. Now, what could be the things that would make a law order unlawful? It would be violations of these basic laws of war, but it would also mean a variety of other things. Of basically, the important another way of saying this is that in the Supreme Court ruled that the president is immune from crimes committed while doing official duties. Service members do not have that protection, which means service members need to ask themselves very carefully, is the order lawful or unlawful? And then if they determine it's unlawful, then there's some difficult decisions to be made.
Very interesting. Does anyone else have anything to jump in before we kind of dive further down into this? I know, Brad, yes, please go ahead.
May I ask James a question? Is that okay?
Absolutely, please.
When you were saying that, the first thing that jumped in my head, and I want to ask this question to you, say we have a young service member, E3 and below, watching us today. And he says, he knows he's low ranking and he doesn't listen to an unlawful order. We know that they're governed by the UCMJ. Unfortunately, we know this, and it's probably going to get worse. We have a lot of people that have an allegiance to Trump, even over the Constitution, that are serving on active duty. He's going to put people in high places in the military to do, hopefully, in his mind, his bidding. What happens if you have a young service member that doesn't take the order? He gets, I don't know if they get locked up or what happens with that. And he's amongst people in the legal system that don't have their best interests at heart. They may be allegiance to Trump. So they're like, no, you didn't listen to what the cult leader said, so we're not going to really defend you in court. So my question is this: how does somebody on the outside, because they are governed by the UCMJ, how does somebody from the outside help that young troop that now is in the system that it may not be representing him as it should?
There's a couple things I would say on that. One, of course, is that all service members, if in a prosecution context, let's say that the young service member disobeys the order, believing it to be unlawful, what happens then? The first thing, of course, I would tell them, of course, is to immediately reach out to the defense JAG. And this is important for all the problems in the military. I do not have many problems with defense JAG because they are under a separate chain of command, and many of them are excellent professionals who care deeply about their clients and will go to bat for them. And so I'm as many problems as we have in the military, I actually am pretty positive about defense JAG. That said, there are circumstances where defense JAG are way too cautious. or where they are not willing to use all the tools in their arsenal to defend someone effectively. One of the examples of this I would give is when it is in the client's best interest to seek public attention to a case. We know that often sunlight is needed on these cases to bring a good result. Defense JAG will not do that, with very few rare exceptions. One of the problems is Defense JAG, as I understand it, have to get approval all the way up the chain of command to ever talk to the press in any way, shape, or form. That tactically is not always the best thing for their clients. And so that's where it's important for service members to know they can bring in a civilian defense attorney. That defense attorney can serve either in place of the JAG or alongside them. For my clients, my advice is actually that I serve alongside the defense JAG. Now, as a civilian lawyer, I sit first chair, which means I make the final call. I can overrule the JAG lawyer. What I like is having the defense JAG at the table is we get to hear their input. We get to hear their inside information about that particular post. They're there every day. I'm not. I practice nationwide, so I need that inside information. So I very much depend on the defense JAG. But what I do and other civilian lawyers do is that we're the outsider, and by being the outsider, we can do things that defense JAG sometimes won't do. We can bring a fresh perspective, and we can also do things such as argue using international law principles, something that defense JAG is not trained to do.
Okay, thank you.
I'm actually, we're going to get a lot more insights from Jonathan later, but you had just mentioned something that was very important, I think, James, which is about utilizing daylight and the press. Jonathan, that was something that was huge for the appeal for redress. And a lot of the work that you had done was getting it outside the silence structure of the DoD into the public discourse by leveraging the media. Can you just briefly kind of talk about how that is actually a tool that could be used regardless of where mainstream media is going? There are still lots of outlets out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. As I was listening to the exchange between Brad and James, I was thinking to myself, where I'm sitting, Lindsay, that the most critical aspect that an E3, because I was exactly an E3 when we launched the appeal for redress. I hadn't quite become an E4 yet. Was to weigh struggle, to actually weigh struggle. When I say weigh struggle, I mean the chain of command understanding that regardless of the UCMJ and the laws and the dictates of the military, that leveraging the DoD directives, that you're going to weigh struggle with peace and justice organizations outside the military structure, but supportive of the enlisted men and women and officers and actually senior enlisted as well who weigh struggle. Okay. In this particular case that Lindsay is pointing to, she's speaking directly to the appeal for redress, which was launched in late October of 2006. Myself, Lindsay, another gentleman by the name of Liam Madden, we were the three enlisted that came forward to launch that appeal for redress against the Iraq war and Iraq and Afghanistan occupation. We say against, we were calling to end those occupations. We were using DoD directives to do that, okay? And even though we were briefed by the PAO, what have you, there was some fear amongst some of my colleagues as to what could potentially happen to us as a result, because we know that retaliation happens in a number of ways. It can happen in very covert ways.
Yes.
In the military, especially when it comes to, promotions, assignments, basic duties. And when you're out to sea, I was in the Navy 7 years, 7 months, and 1 day. I mean, when you're out to sea, all kind of things can happen in the middle of the night that no one will ever hear about. May not hear about you again, in fact. Right. So again, so number one, timing is important, right? When I say timing, meaning when you launch a campaign, there's certain political factors. I don't want to be too long with it, but there's certain political factors that you don't have any control over. One of the things that we had going for us at the time that we did launch the appeal for redress was the fact that the corporate press felt burnt by the Bush administration in late 2006. They had preemptively went into Iraq in 2003, okay, preemptively against the entire world. And 3 years later, it pretty much was common knowledge that Iraq had no weapons of mass destruction at all. Okay. So when we came forward with this critical idea, and I haven't even gotten into how we came to it and all that stuff. But the point is that when we came forward, you had a corporate press, an aspect of that press that was willing to push us forward. So again, speaking truth to power. Nancy, I'm gonna stop right there. I don't want to be too long.
No, that's fine. And we will circle back to a lot of what you have to say. But you've actually feeding from James now to Jonathan. Chris, let me throw it over to you. Jonathan just talked about the unlawful wars in Iraq, the occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan. With all of the research that you've done, say going back to the Revolutionary War, and of course, the highlight being the Vietnam War when protest and dissent was at a crisis. What are some historical precedents that service members can look to when it comes to, and James, I will use your terminology, refusing an unlawful order or dealing with unlawful orders? And we could even touch on conscientious objectives, but you've done all this amazing research, and I want service members and reservists and, National Guard members to know this has been done before. You are not going to be the first one standing up.
She's on mute.
Chris, yeah, I think you're on mute.
I'm not on mute now.
There we go. Great.
First person I thought of was actually from the Civil War. It was the San Creek massacre. A guy named Silas Soule, who was involved with John Brown. He was very anti-slavery, but he joined the war for that reason. But he didn't expect to be occupying Indian land. And when he was ordered by his colonel to basically massacre the Arapaho, he said, "I'm not going to do that." And he stepped away from that, and he managed to do something else. But he also was one of the people that testified about it, the guys for court-martial, and to spread the word about it. I think that we're talking about pairing, that a lot of times what service members can do is make a public stink. And I think that James talked about how some defense counsel are not happy with that. But in general, that's one of the things that often people do. And then the other person I was thinking that was trying to come up with examples, I thought of the Port Chicago 50, which were black service members Navy sailors who were ordered to load ammunition after an explosion at Port Chicago, which is now Concord Naval Weapons Station, and they were charged with mutiny, and Thurgood Marshall defended them, and there was a community around them, but they weren't exonerated until like last year. It took 8 years. So those are not great examples, but in some ways they are examples of the fact that you can stand up and be and support. These guys are worth pointing to.
Yeah. That is so fascinating that we can trace this going back all the way to the Civil War. I mean, everyone thinks of Vietnam, but to know that service members have been dissenting going back essentially since before the formation of this country. Kathleen, let's look a little bit at, what are some policies that service members should be aware of that may impact dissent and protest and free speech? Because obviously free speech is something that's a little different if you are serving in the active duty military, especially when they like to throw out operational security and things like that. What exactly are things that, are important to let people know about dissent specifically? I know, James, you talked a lot about the UCMJ regulations, but are there complaint procedures, whistleblower policies and protections, things like that?
Yes. It's not always possible to refuse an order when you don't know what the consequences will be. Not everyone can do that, and not everybody has time to consult a JAG or civilian attorney before executing or not executing the order. So for a lot of people, dissent is the best way to approach this, as you said, bringing sunlight onto it. The main regulation that governs all that is Department of Defense Instruction, 1325.06, which is the Department of Defense's overriding regulation on protests, free speech, dissent. And it's interesting because it's written in the negative. It says what you cannot do, but everything that's left is what you can do. So just for example, service members have a right to speak out publicly, talk to the media, use social media, but they have to be off duty. They can't use government equipment or funds. They can't reveal classified or OPSEC information. They can't show disrespect to any senior commissioned officer, including the commander-in-chief. And they can't say that they are representing the military or imply that they represent the military. But when you take all those things away, there's still a tremendous option to speak about unfair, illegal, or simply immoral military policies and practices. And a lot of people have used this and the service regs that follow it as a way to protect themselves. There's also in there a right to demonstrate with the same limitations, plus you can't be in a demonstration where there's a breach of the peace or where violence is likely to occur. And that's real difficult because these days in demonstrations, it's not the demonstrators, it's law enforcement that cause violence to occur. And service members need to be careful to distance themselves from any violence in those actions. The one other thing I want to touch on is the very protected communication people have with members of Congress. That's covered by Title 10 of the U.S. Code, Section 1034, and military regulations that follow it. It means that if you communicate with a congressman, say about an illegal order, or about an improper military practice, or about the war in Iraq or the war being supported against Gaza, you can't be retaliated against or punished for making that communication. That's one of the bases for the appeal for redress, that it spoke to members of Congress about these issues. And it's the main way that the current appeal for redress version 2 is protecting service members who write to their members of Congress about U.S. support for the war of Israel against Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
I should stop. That's a lot.
That's okay. No, you've brought up so many amazing things, and I would actually like to open this up to the room because I know there's so much just context, both active actions that involved writing to members of Congress. Yes, Brad, I saw your hand, and I know Jonathan, you've got a lot to add too.
I want to add to that real quickly.
Okay.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Jonathan.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
I got a question. Let Jonathan go.
I want to get some anecdotes, and for those who are online,
Please do.
There's an article that I wrote for the Military Law Task Force online magazine called On Watch that deals specifically with my experiences fighting against racism and all forms of oppression within the military. So you can just Google that. Just Google my name, Hutto, type in racism military, and that'll pop up. There's a couple, I want to get some anecdotes here to add some meat to the bone in terms of what Kathleen was sharing. In terms of violating an order, what I found was two things. One, the potential retaliation, not potential, retaliation is going to come your way, guaranteed. But the level that it comes at you is equal to or connected to, number one, not only how long you've been within your command, but also the respect you have amongst your peers. Your peer group, really, what kind of sailor, soldier, Marine, airman, what kind of, how are you amongst your peers? So, for example, when we were off the coast of Iraq in early January 2006, I had a hangman's noose in front of my face, right? And for my Navy veterans out there or active duty, you know what the word cranking is, okay? So I was cranking at the time, okay? For lack of a better word, doing SHIT work on the ship, right? So part of that work was cleaning the executive officer's suite, okay? there was a point right during that EO investigation when the investigator ruled that my allegations were true, that the same senior chief, okay, who was protecting these overt racists, was then demanding that I bring him the hangman's noose before the executive officer's inquiry, okay, which I didn't do. I directly violated the order and I put it on the executive officer's desk. So what was the retaliation? The retaliation was right after they got chewed out in that XOI. I was then written up by this same chain of command, right? And was told to sign a counseling check, which I did not sign, by the way. So those are some of those. But it could have been more, right? The retaliation could have been heavier, but that was what the potential. That's what it was. During the appeal for redress, let me give another example, because this was an example of a chain of command ignoring the actual rights of a service member. Just because you have rights, don't mean that your chain of command is going to adhere to. You have to affirm those rights. We were at a rally, United for Peace and Justice. This is the last one I'll share for now. United for Peace and Justice, January 2007. There's about 20 of us active duty members out there. One of those members, you can look her up. Bless her heart forever. Bless her soul forever. Her name is Tassie McKee. She was a linguist out of Fort Meade, okay, Air Force, okay. Tassie spoke out against the war. And when she spoke out to a New York Times reporter. When she got back to her command there at Fort Meade, she was locked out of her office. She was locked out of the building, in fact, reassigned. But she got in touch with she got in touch with the IG, that's the Inspector General, who then informed her chain of command about her rights, that she had not violated any laws, that she was speaking in accordance with Military DOD Directive 1325.6 governing the actions of service members. She was off duty, out of uniform, speaking on her own time, not speaking ill of the president, high officials. That's that language they use, right? And then lastly, then she got her position back. Lastly, Lindsay, the writing members of Congress. This is the point I'm gonna say about this. Members of Congress, from my experience, because I wrote Congressman John Lewis on my EO case. Writing a member of Congress has less to do with the power element, because they really don't have power to shift your chain of command. They really don't. But what it does is it puts whatever issue you're dealing with into the public sphere. If this issue is because a lot of times the chain of command wants to keep it swept on the rug, keep it private. Once you write a Congress member and a Congress member responds, that's a public document. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Brett, you had a question to ask.
Yeah, no, actually, Jonathan kind of went into some things I wanted. Kathleen, back to your point, I hate to be that guy, but I got to be that guy. We're dealing with MAGA, like a Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, if somebody was one of her, was a military member that went to her, I don't feel, I know that she wouldn't do the right thing. Her lead. We've never had what we're about to face and what we've seen already with the allegiance to Trump. There was no insurrection, all the stuff that we know. So if you have a service member reach out to one of these people, and to Jonathan's point, there's going to be blowback. But I think now with these MAGA Republicans that everything is aligned with the cult leader, Trump, it's going to be even worse if they're writing to them. What do they do? How do they, if they write to him, if they decide to write to him and they go directly to Trump, and Trump's all about revenge, what happens?
From my point of view, the important thing is not what the member of Congress is going to do, but the fact that the service member has triggered, with this protected communication, protected under U.S. code, has triggered the right not to have reprisals or retaliation. So when, for instance, he goes or she goes on to talk to the press and the command explodes, the fact that there was first a communication with Congress makes it harder for the command to claim that their retaliation has nothing to do with that complaint to Congress.
Yeah. James,
Okay.
did you have something to add to that? I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I want to want to mention a few things on the writing to Congress, and it kind of goes back to what Brad alerted us to. There is a danger in writing to Congress.
Mhm.
In the past, some members of Congress have been quite hostile to service members, have even forwarded their letters directly to the FBI. That has happened in the past, alleging misconduct of various kinds. There's been cases, of course, where that the communication, what should happen when you contact a member of Congress, is that kicks off what's called congressional inquiry, where a member of Congress or their staffer writes a letter to the command, asks them to clarify what they're doing, ask for some information, and then by law, the command is required to respond back. Now, we all know what typically happens is it's going to be a BS response back to the member of Congress. And so if you have a good member of Congress, you tell them in advance that's exactly what's going to happen. And I want you to be ready to push back, to do that follow-up letter. If you have a more hostile member of Congress, there's some challenges there. One of the issues is you may choose to write to a different member of Congress. Every person in the United States has 3 members of Congress to represent them. Your state's 2 U.S. senators and 1 member of the U.S. House. Sometimes it may strategically make sense to talk to one of them rather than another. But also to be aware that, yes, there could be consequences. Now, that said, that's also touches what Kathy just talked about, and that is that by still initiating congressional inquiry, even if it goes poorly, it does create a paper trail. And that's where the next piece of it is documentation. A service member in a situation like this needs to keep very detailed notes of what's going on, of how their command is treating them. For instance, if they get singled out in morning formation, told that they're a piece of shit, and made threatening remarks in a public setting, then they need to write that down. They need to write down in their notebook what day, what time happened. Was it at the formation or was it in a private setting? Who were the witnesses? That kind of note taking is very critical. And then, of course, getting that to legal counsel, to the GI rights hotline, someone else who could help the service member then to know what are their tools to respond to the retaliation. And there's a variety of options. These include filing an Article 138 complaint against the command under the UCMJ. It could involve the Inspector General's office. I personally have a very skeptical, even cynical approach to IG, but there are rare cases they do some helpful things. More often, it's the threat of going to IG. Sometimes it involves going to the press. There's a variety of things that can be done to deal with retaliation, but the key is documentation along the way. That's what can change these cases.
Yeah, I'd actually. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kathleen.
Oh, I was going to say the military is more scared about accusations of retaliation and reprisal now than they have been in the past. There are more regulations. There is a new article to the UCMJ about formal retaliation, so that, as James says, documenting and then raising this issue either back to the congressperson or to the IG or through a 138 or through a military equal opportunity complaint. There's more of a tendency on the military's part to want to duck and cover.
Mm. Yeah, I wonder if we can tune into maybe some specific examples. I'm thinking, and this may or may not fall within the exact purview of what we're talking about, but I'm thinking about like Chelsea Manning and Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib, and even going back to the My Lai massacre. All examples of either whistleblowers or what have you. What were some of the, I guess, strategies or things that did bring attention to these issues? And yes, service members were retaliated against. Guantanamo is still around, but it did get out into the public zeitgeist. And this is open to anybody. Obviously, you all have a lot of knowledge on these matters.
So I'll jump here. I'll jump here. One of the major inspiration for the appeal for redress was the GI movement of the Vietnam War. Okay. And during that time, I don't want to go all the way down the history lane here. What I will say, and I'm looking to my left here to see if I can pull out that book. There was a major inspiration, but I don't see it. But the point is that utilizing the press, but particularly the alternative press, right? Because what we learned is that there's a difference between the corporate press and the alternative press. Okay. In the early 70s, the Winter Soldier hearings, which were held in Detroit, Michigan, okay, documenting crimes against humanity, genocide in Vietnam, there was hardly any corporate press that televised those hearings. However, the information still got out the Winter Soldier hearings in terms of what these were Vietnam veterans purging themselves of all the atrocities that they had directly participated in, which then became an inspiration to the Winter Soldier hearings of 2008 with Iraq war veterans. Again, corporate press totally whited out that hearing and did not cover it. Okay. But I will say that all of the books, all the articles, and in particular, a documentary called Sir, No, Sir, okay, done by David Ziegler, documenting the GI movement. That, for me, when I saw that documentary, coupled with David Courtwright's Soldiers in Revolt, documenting that entire history, within, for lack of a better framing, Lindsay, the suck that I was in, that added that certainly inflamed and embroiled me to press forward. I leave it. I stop here.
Kathleen, were you going to say something?
I was going to tell a story about a different policy struggle and what the press meant for that. When HIV first came to the military's attention as HTLV-3, they decided that people who had HIV should be discharged if they told their doctors during their evaluations that they were gay or had engaged in drug use or anything else that would be grounds for a discharge at the time. We represented the first sailor who was facing discharge under that policy. One of the things we did was to invite the media to the discharge hearing, and the command wouldn't let them in. So they stood out in the hallway, talking to our witnesses before the witnesses came in and talking to us when we came out on break. We lost at the hearing, but as we were getting ready to file in federal court, the military dropped that policy. So since then and now, anything you say to a doctor during an HIV evaluation is protected and can't be used to punish you or discharge you. One of our attorneys ran into a Pentagon press person a while after that who said that the press was so heavy and the public response to that press was so heavy that they had to assign one person full-time to respond to those things.
Wow.
It changed a policy that had prevented medical retirement for a large number of sailors and soldiers and airmen and Marines. Yeah. And it was really the press and the public that made the military change. It wasn't our brilliant lawsuit or our brilliant arguments at the hearing, although they were.
Chris, obviously, with all of your historical knowledge, do you have anything else to add about some of these contemporary examples?
You mentioned My Lai.
Yes.
Hugh Thompson, who was flying off in a helicopter and brought it to attention to everybody at his command at that point, and wouldn't let go. I mean, the people who tried to alert people at in command about My Lai go back to Major Colin Powell poo-pooing it at one point. That there's a long list, but Hugh Thompson actually made a difference, and he continued to speak out about it forever. I want to mention also the GI press. Talk about media that you make. Media people are doing their own media now, and the GI press during the war, like 300 newspapers, GI written newspapers all over the country.
Wow.
And our history, people who history about it now, even mainstream journalists go back and find the Oleo Strut and all those newspapers from Fort Hood or wherever.
Wow.
And that's to tell them people who dissent, one way they can dissent is to write.
Yeah.
And that's important.
Jane,
it was on TikTok though or whatever, but it's parallel.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing is that we do have social media these days, and unfortunately, with the trends we've been seeing with mainstream media being controlled by billionaire oligarchs, we are seeing an explosion of Substacks and alternative news outlets, and because of social media, that information is being shared at a rate which was a lot more difficult during the Vietnam era or even before that. James, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to mention one of the tensions that's come up, and I think it's come up in several of the previous panelists have just spoken just a moment ago, is the issue of collective action. And it raises one of the biggest challenges we face from the legal standpoint, and that is there's a federal law that bars collective bargaining for members of the military, and even bars civilians from attempting to support service members in collective bargaining efforts. That is it's a really a problematic thing in my opinion, and I think it raises some obvious constitutional issues, including the right of association for service members. Nevertheless, those laws have largely been upheld thus far, which means we have to be very creative when it comes to collective organizing work. One of the ways around that is the big loophole that was utilized by Jonathan Hutto and others who started the original appeal for redress and is used again in our reboot of it, which is by writing letters to Congress. Service members, they have to be individual letters. We can't do a mass letter because that would be collective, but individual letters done though in unison, that arguably is something different. So we
Yeah.
have to be very creative in how we do that. At the same time, collective action is what changes things. We know that from Vietnam. Like Jonathan, I was deeply moved when I saw Sir No Sir, when I read Soldiers in Revolt. It changed my whole legal career, frankly, the
Yeah.
direction I was going when I saw those things, seeing what collective work does. And so one of the challenging things is we need collective work. We also obviously don't want service members going to jail for doing so, and we ourselves don't want to go to jail. And so there is some tension here. At the same time, I have to believe that we have to find ways for people to build networks of support. And members of the military, just like any other oppressed community, organizing happens collectively. It happens together. And so how do we do that? It can be really tricky.
You, James, just perfectly transitioned into where I was going next, tossing it over to Jonathan. You are a lifelong organizer and activist. So much of what you did combating racism and oppression within the military, not to mention the occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan. How can service members organize within their ranks without violating UCMJ? You're going to put yourselves in the crosshairs, but perhaps there's ways to mitigate that a little bit. What are things service members can do?
Well, I think first and foremost, service members who are listening to this, um, it is about education. I kid you not, I joined the military, Lindsay, as you know, shortly before my 27th birthday. So Lindsay and I have a history before joining the military. Lindsay and I knew each other at Amnesty International. She was a young intern. I was a young staffer. So, and I raised that history of Lindsay and I to say that I entered the military just like Lindsay with a human rights ethos. Okay. Knowing, because one of the differences between our generation of folks coming out of college in the 90s and early 2000s was from the prior generation, a number of us with working class backgrounds were able to fund college education, but primarily through student loans. So we're not coming out of privileged backgrounds, but we're still coming out of college highly educated, but poor. Some of us poor. Okay. So that being stated, I put that out there to say that you have an influx of people like us going into the military, coming out of nonprofit situations. Okay. So part of the job of these nonprofits that are on the line here and others who have that education, people, like Military Law Task Force, like Veterans for Peace, like About Face, others doing the anti-military work within the schools, the anti-recruitment work, what have you, is to actually get to these young people going to boot camp, get to these young folks coming out of these community colleges, get the information in their hands. They're going to be enlisting, they're going to be facing oppression, and then they're going to raise these issues from within their chain of command. They're going to be seeking your information out. As an enlisted member, I was reading all of y'all stuff and then some. Thomas Barton, I believe he's He's deceased now. He used to put out a GI newsletter all the time. I used to read all the time. Okay. And so with that being stated, when the struggles happen, number one, it's important that you don't struggle alone. Okay. I can't say that enough. Okay. You cannot fight the chain of command by yourself. And even when you got your comrades, they still shooting, for lack of better framing, shooting bullets at you. Okay. And once you decide to go EO, I said this in my article, I'm getting a little long-winded, but I gotta get some stuff out here. Once you decide to take your chain of command on, you got to be willing to go all the way. There's no turning back. Once you take them on, it is on for them. Okay. They're trying to crush you by any means necessary. And in that piece that I wrote, I talk about that. It's very important that you be based in those DOD directives. And even though you know those DOD directives, they're not going to protect you in total. Okay. Risk taking is important. Being based with a Vietnam veteran or veterans, the relationship between myself and Rodney Green, I have not said his name today. Rodney Green, a GI movement veteran, a retired professor out of Howard University that I knew. My relationship to him was beyond critical because he was part of the GI movement in the early 70s. A lot of lessons, a lot of strategies. He's the reason why I went back to the ship when I went UA early on, when I was determined I wasn't going to deal with the oppression anymore. So, Lindsay, I say all that to say that it's important to be based with folks that you can wage struggle with. Do not wage struggle alone. And when you decide to take on your chain of command, you have to be willing to go all the way and face every ounce of repercussion that comes from that, in hopes that you will be where we are today, bruised but not defeated, battered but heads not bowed, and able to share these stories so a generation can press on.
I love that. Brad, I was just going to turn to you, Brad. Please go ahead.
No, this panel is fantastic. We're talking about people on active duty, but I'm telling you, in my coalition, the humanity side, we're talking about humanity here, and this is a wonderful thing. Jonathan just made a point. With my coalition, it's not, we have veterans, it's not some of the issues that we're talking about the active duty, but like he just said, there's a key thing that he just said, and I know a lot of my people in the coalition are watching this, is you're not alone. People are scared. They're scared across the board, not just active duty, people, with disabilities and everything that is coming out, that Trump is going to do this and Trump is going to do that. And all of these other groups, Musk and Ramaswamy talking about cutting benefits. So what he just said about not being alone is so important. And it crosses everything, not just active duty members that we're trying to help here today, but humanity in a whole, because people are scared on our side, and coming together collectively is something else that he said is so, so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Brad, let's just stick with this for a little bit. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the power of speaking out and writing. You are actively involved in the social media space and have seen the power in creating your coalition that utilizing social media has to network and engage with people across the spectrum. Having spent over 20 years in the Navy, what do you think service members can expect in the next 2 years, 4 years? And how do you think that they can leverage what outlets exist now that didn't exist during Iraq and Afghanistan? And of course, going back further than that.
Well, it ties in to what the other panelists said, what James talked about and Kathleen talked about. You do have social media, and there are people in this space that may have never even served, but they're in support of what's right, and that's the key. What's right? Utilizing, the different shows, the different hosts that have connections, because they've brought in this network of people has brought in congressmen on our side. Though it's tough. I know they got the majorities. I know they won the House. I know they won the Senate, but it's not over. I tell people it's not over. Don't give up. Don't throw the white flag in. We need to build towards 2026 of getting people in positions, local and state. Someone mentioned local and state here earlier. I can't remember which panel said it, but I want to piggyback on it, where they said it's so important talking. I think that it might have been you, James, that said about local and state representatives, or Kathleen, I can't remember, how important it is. That's something in our coalition that we're going to eventually go to after we create this community, is getting people elected, winning back these state houses where the Republicans, where unfortunately a lot of times we become complacent in midterm elections or local and state elections. The Republicans, the MAGA Republicans, have taken over. So getting that information out, like you were talking about, through social media, through allies, real allies. The thing that I tell my coalition is this: make sure that it's factual information that we're putting out, because unfortunately in social media, it's got the bad side too. And it's the TikToker that's trying to monetize and puts up something that's completely BS. It goes uber viral, and you got all the people worried. They're like, oh my God, this is going to happen. The sky is falling. And it's not remotely true. So I would say to people watching is, check your sources, double and triple. Don't go off of some TikToker that says this or that. You have people on this panel that we call in the military, and I know when I say this, Jonathan know right away, SMEs, subject matter experts. Go to your subject matter expert. If it doesn't sound right what somebody's putting out on social media, I can promise you that 99% of the time it's not right. You'll know by the cadence of the person. You'll know by little things that they say, whether it's right or wrong. Double check your information, because in these days and times, we need the most factual information from the best sources that we can get. And they are out there in a social media space that we've never had before. I mean, during the Trump time, if one thing really good, two things came out. One, it showed us who people really were. That was one good thing. So now we know what we're up against. But two, it created people that want to help veterans, especially, not just the ones that say, thank you for your service, which we appreciate that, but going the extra mile to really help out veterans, whether it's benefits, whether it's the things we're talking about for active duty. Because I'm going to tell you something, for the people watching this, my heart goes out to active duty people. Like I said, I came in '86 and I retired in 2006. I saw racism. I was stationed in Pensacola, Florida. I saw it early on, because people always say, oh, there's no racism in the military. So then you're living in a bubble. And I always tell people this: I know you respect the military and you thank us for your service and you see us with our uniforms, but I say this and I mean this. And I'll speak for me when I say this. Just because you put on a military uniform does not make you a good person, because if you are racist, misogynistic, homophobic, or whatever you were before, most likely it's not going to change you when you put that uniform on. You're going to bring that in. And as you move up in the ranks, you're going to affect those groups that I just talked about. Now, in fairness, I have had sailors in my career that were raised racist, okay? And I put them together on teams with African-American people, with Hispanic people, straight and gay, because I went through the whole donut. When I came in, you had to check the box if you were homosexual. Then we went through the don't ask, don't tell era. Then it was they couldn't, we went through all these eras. I was during all these eras I was in. Putting people together, I have seen people say, Petty Officer Berkwood, I want to just let you know, I mean in tears, I want to let you know that you put me together. I was raised like this. I don't want to be like this. But unfortunately, with social media, to circle back and finish up the thought, there's a lot of hatred out on social media too. You see these veteran groups that are all about hate, and they draw in. And when I say young sailors, they draw in young sailors. A lot of them don't have college education. They come from very poor background, and they can be very influenced. I've seen it, and it's worse now than it's ever been before. That's why you saw veterans go to the Capitol on January 6th and try to overturn the election through an insurrection. Right. So that's what I want to say.
Yeah, Jonathan, please.
I want to add some numbers real quick to this.
Please.
One of the things I want to hone in on is the quality aspect of this. A lot of times in movement building, what will halt people is when they feel like, it's just me and a couple of people. Let me give you some numbers on this movement building aspect here. When Lindsay, myself, and Liam Madden, it was just three of us. When we decided to launch this appeal for redress, I met Liam in June of 2006 in Norfolk, Virginia. I knew Lindsay from our time at Amnesty International, and then we bumped into each other in apprentice school where she was training to be a videographer. I was trained to be a photographer. Okay. That was in 2004. In the fall of 2006, it was just three of us. One sailor, Army, Marine that launched the appeal for redress. That was October 23rd, 2006. Within 2 weeks, we had 65 signers. When we had 65 signers of the appeal for redress, a very simple patriotic statement, as a patriotic American proud to serve the nation in uniform, I proudly, we are humbly, honorably, I'm paraphrasing, respectfully asking our members of Congress to withdraw all bases and military members from Iraq. What is happening in Iraq is not working. We're asking for all the troops to come home. With those 65 signers, Tony Snow, who was then the White House press secretary, was being pressed about us in a White House briefing live. They were asking him, the major press, about these 65 signers. And he had the number one, speak to our constitutional right to do what we were doing. He was saying these service members have the right to as long as they don't violate. He said at the same time, though, he said, so unfortunate that they get all this press and not the men and women who are bravely serving. Okay. By the time we had 600 signers, now we're being called by 60 Minutes, okay? Nation Magazine wants to do a front cover piece. And that Nation Magazine piece, I would urge everyone to get their hand, find it on Google. It's called About Face, the growing anti-war movement within the military. What's so fascinating and so educational about that piece is the broad ideological spectrum of the appeal signers. They interviewed roughly 24 of us. They interviewed about 24 of us for that article. About a third of people they interviewed were on the ground in Iraq. And the ideological spectrum was broad. Yes, some people who were ideologically opposed to the occupation. And yes, some people who really did believe Saddam Hussein was a tyrant who should have been overthrown. They were just sick and tired sick and tired of being sick and tired. On their third, fourth deployment, some lost their marriages. They're tired of seeing comrades killed on the ground. Again, 600 signers. 60 Minutes, Nation Magazine. By the time we had 1,000, now you got Congressman Dennis Kucinich, Congressman John Lewis, Congressman McGovern on board with us. By the time we had 2,000 signers, Lindsay, remember this, we had the entire Progressive Caucus of the House behind the appeal for redress and had the Institute for Policy Studies, a major progressive think tank, awarding us with the Atelier Mafia Human Rights Award, which Lindsay and I was on live to get that award. So I say all this to say, and I'm highlighting Lindsay quite a bit, because Lindsay's very humble. Lindsay was with me all the way on the appeal for redress. We were lockstep from the inception of the appeal for redress. I want to state that publicly. Lindsay Burnett was with us from the inception of the appeal for redress. I documented in my book, Anti-War. So, but I say all that to say the numbers. It started with 3 people. 3 people who were determined to take the risk and to go all the way. That's important in terms of movement building. It starts small and it can build.
And this was before social media, so that's the other thing to take into account.
Right, which is incredible. And I got a lot of people watching from my coalitions watching this call. Did you hear what he just said? Numbers. The more people, numbers, the more voices, it makes a difference. You hear what he just said? 60 Minutes came. I've been putting this out to my coalition people. You know, you're not alone. We're coming together, and numbers and strength. And as it grows and grows and grows, it ties into what Jonathan just said. Where I was telling people, because a lot of people say our votes don't count. You become so big, especially in local and state. I'm talking, and everybody in this panel knows, a local election, it could be county commissioner if it's a voting thing. 5 votes could make the difference in a race between a good, strong Democrat and a MAGA Republican. And I'm reminding people of these type of things. And I'm so glad that you broke it down like that, Jonathan, because strength in numbers is so important. And I want to stress to everybody watching this, and that includes veterans on active duty who may be interested in joining my coalition, because I had a couple. We are here for you. These people on this panel, this is what we need right now. It's so, I always say in history, moments come, and it's how you step up to that moment in time. This is the time, folks. Trump is going in on the 20th. If you weren't sold, Vice President Harris certified that election yesterday, because that wasn't going to happen. And I don't want to go into the whole thing, but I know people are still in this mindset. He's going to get handcuffed on the podium, and they're going to take him off to prison. You know, I don't want to go into the whole thing, but the point that I'm making is you're not alone. And what he just said, strength in numbers.
Yeah, and actually that ties in really well with something that one of the people mentioned in the Q&A section is how can I get involved? And I'm going to open this up to everybody because we have representatives from nonprofits here. We have authors, organizers. What are things that people might right now feel completely helpless? What are things that people can do to help, people who are serving? Anyone who wants to jump in, I will.
Well,
Clean.
I can make a couple of suggestions. One is that there are veterans organizations working to provide support for active duty people, which is how this panel came to be. You want to help, you can join Continue to Serve or Veterans for Peace or About Face Veterans Against the War. And at least I don't know about Continue to Serve. The last two of those groups also have associate members like me who never serve but want to provide support. Working in those groups to support individual and collective GI resistance is really important. Someone said, "You're not alone." And that's really also including civilians like veterans groups, like the GI Rights Hotline, like the Military Law Task Force that can give moral, political, and legal support to GI dissenters. Joining one of those groups is a really important way to help. Another is to get out the word to service members in your communities or in your networks to make sure that they know that help is available and that there is support for them if they want to take on issues.
That's great.
Yeah, those are the main things I would suggest.
Absolutely.
One of the things
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to add on what Kathy said is that it's really critical, actually, that we start having those conversations with service members right now and not to wait until the crisis comes. This is a situation that we can see this crisis coming. The Trump administration, they made it very clear their fascist agenda for this country and what's to come. And so, given that reality, we need to be talking to service members now so they understand what their rights are. They understand who has their back when they need it, but also to encourage them to start having now those moral and ethical conversations. These are not easy questions.
Yeah.
I can say, as an attorney who's worked with service members who have had to make the difficult choice of disobeying orders they believed were unlawful, and in some cases, facing the consequences for that, one of the greatest dilemmas they face is the tensions they feel between their conscience, but also their loyalty to their comrades. These are not
Mhm.
easy things to work through. It's not something you want to be dealing with the night before deployment. And so that's why having these conversations now helps service members to be ready when they might be then having to make those difficult decisions.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Brad, go ahead.
I don't want to step on your toes as the moderator, but since we're on this subject about active duty veterans, I'm a huge ally of the LGBTQ community. And I would kind of like to ask the panel, if you don't mind, Lindsay, what about, because Trump is saying he's going to kick out transgender troops. What do we do for the transgender, not even veterans, active duty members that are fearful that they're going to get kicked out, or he's going to, because he's back on Leon's platform again, send out a tweet, even though it didn't work like that. I don't think it worked when I think Mattis told him you can't do that, the first administration. But what do we say for the transgender troops that are scared to death out there that they're going to be kicked out because Trump said that he's going to remove them?
I'm going to task that to our lawyers.
Well, the reality is that the president could probably do that, with a few complications along the way. Hopefully, there would be litigation. Hopefully, there would be some things, but I think actually the likelihood of that happening is very high. And so, for any transgender folks who are in the military listening now, I would say now is the time to get your ducks in a row, to do what you can to have the softest landing possible. And I hate to, I really, I feel bad saying putting it that way, but we know what from a constitutional standpoint, the president has tremendous power as commander in chief. Much of daily life in the military is governed by DoD regulations that are implemented by the commander, that are put in place by the commander in chief and the Secretary of Defense. The based on who Trump has picked for his Secretary of Defense, we can expect things to be bad for quite a while now. And so sometimes, and this is the other thing, sometimes in these situations, we're looking at direct confrontation. Sometimes we're looking at indirect confrontation. Sometimes we're looking at for the soft landing. And for different service members, the choices they will make may be different. And I would also suggest that this is not new. Going back to the Vietnam era, there were many service members who resisted in a variety of ways. Some directly opposed, refused to obey orders. Some committed acts of sabotage. Some had conversations with their buddies and circulated underground newspapers. Some, and when they had the choice, they didn't shoot at the enemy. Resistance looks like many different things, and I think it's important also to let service members know that there are difficult choices, and there's not very seldom is there one simple righteous choice. There's often multiple choices, and that they have to navigate. But this is why having these conversations now is important.
Yeah.
I would also say another group that's really be targeted will not just be transgender troops, but will also be just lesbian and gay and bisexual troops. I think it will be harder for Trump to undo some of those things, those protections. I think it still could be coming. The good news, though, is that well, I'll go back to when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was finally repealed. For people that dealt with service members at the time, it was not a surprise to us that we did not hear massive cases of bad things happening in units when gay service members were allowed to serve openly, because in many units it was already the norm that while some commanders, some NCOs were belligerent jerks, most of the rank and file were not. And so this is also where I'm expecting that many LGBTQ troops are their buddies are going to have their backs, and there's going to be when the witch hunts come, and they will. There will be service members, their buddies will say, no, I have no idea if he's gay or not, doesn't matter to me. There will be a variety of kinds of pushback, and part of that still comes back to solidarity, working together, finding those connections. And so now is the time for those conversations with service members, but also now is the time for conversations between service members, of building up those networks of solidarity to be ready for what is to come.
I am gonna take a slight permission as moderator to add something, though. I have been actively involved in women's issues for most of my life, and I am going to point out that I do think one of the largest threats that we are going to see is the lack of women's health care within the active duty and the veteran community. Right now, there is a DoD policy that women are able to take leave to go get abortions in states where it is legal still. I actually see that going away. The VA has very strict guidelines on when abortions can be done. And so I would say to all of the female veterans out there and service members, get an IUD put in. Do whatever you can to protect yourself, because study after study continues to show that the rates of sexual assault within the military against female and male members, but especially women, because we have to worry about the issues of pregnancy, are still extremely high. If you are a transitioning transgender person, both within the active duty and the veteran community, get your treatments pushed up if you can. Get those surgeries, get those hormone treatments started now. We've already seen them taken away from your children within the active duty community. And as the friend of several service members who have transitioned as veterans, take care of yourself and don't wait for the hammer to drop. Reach out to the National Abortion Coalition, which is still kind of trying to provide underground resources to women seeking abortion. Luckily, the post office medical abortion is making things a lot easier than it has been in the past. But I see those being the most pressing threats that are going to come with this new administration, because those are directives that don't need congressional votes. They're going to be taken away like that. So that's my 2 cents jumping in. We've got about 15 minutes left. I know Chris had to leave us. I'm just going to open up the floor and say, what are things that we haven't touched on that you think are really important for service members to know, be it regulations, be it ideas on organizing, or historical context that's good for service members and the veteran community to understand?
I'll go back to the "you're not alone" part of this. Just as I would encourage civilians to get involved in the veterans groups that we mentioned, or to go to the Military Law Task Force and the GI Rights Network, I would say to service members, remember that you're not alone, that there are these groups that can provide political, moral, and legal support, and that reaching out to them now, finding out from them what support is available, what rights you have, is an important predecessor to what we're going to be facing in a few weeks.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. Yeah, lay the groundwork. And again, we have social media. You can find so many of these organizations continue to serve Common Defense, Brad. There's other organizations that have popped up within the past year that are actively working to fight fascism within the military. So find them, reach out to them. Like Brad said, we're all here for you. That's why we're here. If you have questions, if you have concerns. I did have one question, though, for James, going back to contacting your representatives. Does it have to be your personal elected representative within your area? Can you reach out to, say, an Adam Schiff, a more friendly, he's my representative, but could you reach out to a representative who is perhaps more friendly to the types of issues you're raising? Or if you have a family member who is a constituent of that, can you do that?
Absolutely. There's
Right.
no restriction on that. You can speak freely. By the way, this brings up another, though you said something there that just hit something really important, and that is during the height of the Afghan and Iraq wars, when we had a very strong anti-war movement, when we had the GI coffee houses running, during that revival of them for a bit of time. One of the pieces of activism that was incredibly effective, and I don't think we're making enough of use of it now, is the role of military family members, particularly spouses. And I saw this play out multiple times where that a service member was, when my client was facing a lot of bad situations, and the decision, after kind of considering the risk of the service member speaking out, it was really clear actually the best person to speak out was the service member's spouse. And the beauty of that is that the service member spouse is not subject to the UCMJ. They're not subject to DOD 1325.06 or any of these other issues.
Mm.
And I had a commander actually tell my clients, like, you need to control your wife. She's causing us problems. And the client said, I can't control her. That's ridiculous. And it was for a commander to say that to me, what I told my client was, this shows how vulnerable they are. This
Yeah.
shows how scared they are of your wife. And so please encourage your wife to keep doing what she's doing. And so the more we can do that help spouses, it can make a big difference.
Yeah.
But the challenging thing is that service member spouses are still often in a very vulnerable position. They may, for instance, live on post. They may be some other complicating factors, but nevertheless, they have more freedom to speak in ways that service members themselves cannot speak. Particularly when it comes to talking to the press, often I'm actually a big fan of having spouses talk to the press more than the clients sometimes, just because the risks are different. And also, spouses are sympathetic in the media and the public eye. Many people who cannot, for various reasons, may not be able to show that compassion to a service member, they will to the spouse. And so I do think anything we can do to support spouses, to encourage them to speak up, can make a big difference.
Yeah.
Jonathan, I saw you unmute there. Did you want to add some thoughts?
I was sitting up here thinking about some thoughts. One of the things I would say is that it's very important because during the Iraq War era, even now, these deployments are long. The separations are deep, and for E3 and below, you're dealing with a population oftentimes that is single, and oftentimes are coming from family situations that may not be as supportive or deeply connect them to that service member. So one of the things I want to urge us to do, and I'm pushing myself in this way as well, is that in knowing the policies and being ready to struggle and wage the fight, to also for us to be deeply relational with active duty, especially if we live adjacent to bases, we live in base towns. I know that the Catholic Worker has been one of those organizations that has done that for years and decades, Quaker houses and what have you, to be relational with these active duty, to provide safe havens for them, just to write letters to them when they're deployed, send them care packages, and let them know that you're thinking of them, that you're wishing them well, you wish them a safe return, because oftentimes the level of risk that an active duty member is willing to take is also connected to the relationship that they have with us, and whether that relationship is a personal one, okay, where they can trust you. Oftentimes trust doesn't boil down to politics or ideological alignment. Just, do I know that you got me, you care about me, and you're going to risk with me? That's what being a comrade is. Are you going to take the brunt with me? If I fall through the cracks, do you have me? Can you ensure that I don't, that I can still live and carry on? That's crucial. That's critical, and I
Yeah.
was fortunate to have a couple of people in my life like that during that time. So I just want to put that out there, Lindsay.
Yeah, I love that. And to this point that Kathleen and James and Jonathan have raised so eloquently, is this knowing the rights, knowing the UCMJ, knowing the regulations that you are actively not breaking by doing what you're doing. I would say that was one of the things that protected me in the appeal for redress, is that I was in the PAO office, because of my unusual stature as being the person with the camera who everybody in the entire brigade knew. And they knew my background. They knew I knew my rights. My first sergeant yelled at me, but that was unfortunately, unlike Jonathan, that was the extent of my retribution, because they knew I knew what I was doing. And to Jonathan's point earlier, I had made inroads with everyone in my command. JAG knew me, the doctors knew me, the PAO knew me. And so your reputation can go a long way in that, well, we don't like that she spoke out, but she's really good at her job. And we know that she knows what to do if we retaliate. So I think it's really important. I know those regulations can be so dense to read, and maybe reaching out to someone like the National Lawyers Guild can be helpful. If you know you're not breaking the rules, there can be so much power in the knowledge that you are in the right and they are not. And that can be because so much of the military is fear tactics. It's threatening you with action and making you feel like you've done something wrong when you haven't. So I love that you all have brought up just the power of knowledge, and with social media and people like Brad being out there and making videos about what exactly your rights are, I think is really, really important. In the last couple minutes left, I just want to add, is there any other nuggets of knowledge that you want to put out in this very uncertain time that we are facing now?
If I could, I want to go ahead, Jonathan.
Real quickly, I'll just say, Brad, do not underestimate not only your power to speak truth to power, but also to write and document. Okay, however you launch these movements, whether they're very broad based or if they're just I don't want to talk about this in a margin sense, but there's struggles within your command. Document. In the midst, the reason why I'm called an author today, I'm always tickled by it, because I didn't aspire to write a book. I was recruited to write a book. We were in the midst of the appeal for redress, and the editor Carl Bromley from Nation Books actually found me at a demonstration and was like, "Look, you got to get this stuff written down." He was like, "You got to write this stuff. I hope you're recording this." He said, because what'll happen is, if as practitioners, if we don't document the struggles that we're in for posterity and for generations to utilize going forward, someone else will, and they may not have the same outlook, and they certainly may not be writing, for lack of a better framing, from the mud, from the trenches that you would write from, and that's where exactly I wrote from. So I want to put that out there, like, as we move forward in this era, notes, minutes, your perspectives, everything, write them down, and you may be able to get articles out, books out within journals and what have you. And I'm experienced with that. I can help people with that. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah. Brad.
For people, the younger people watching this, James gave some examples, and I want to give one and then close up on my coalition. But James mentioned spouses. I believe in giving real-time scenarios to people. Perfect example in the Trump administration is Sergeant Ladave Johnson, who I believe he was beheaded, the African-American, I think he was in the Army, and his wife was pregnant. And I believe she was out of Florida, and the congresswoman was Frederica something. I can't think of her last name. And Trump said to the spouse, he knew what he signed up for, which is the most callous thing you could possibly say. This is a gold star wife. So when James is talking about folks that are watching this research that one. He attacked the Khan family, another gold star family. And Jim and Kelly, his former chief of staff, allowed him to do that when he is a gold star father. His son was blown up. So he allowed Trump to do this. So these are real-time things. So I'm glad that James put that out about spouses because they're really important. Last thing I'd like to say, as far as my part, if there's any active duty members watching this, I know you're in a different situation than me as a veteran, but I want you to know that the BBB Crew Coalition is there for you too. Anything that we can do, you reach out to me. Even if you don't join the coalition, and we can help you in any way, shape, or form, because you're on the right side of history. You're not a MAGA veteran. You know that you took an oath to the Constitution to defend it against enemies, foreign and domestic. And I do consider Trump a domestic enemy of the state. But we're here. You reach out to me, and even if you don't come in a coalition, if there's something my coalition can do, we are here to support you.
Yeah. And I will add, since we're wrapping up here, obviously we do not have the chat feature. We are going to be putting these videos on social media, and we are going to include resources within those sections. So please, things to know: the GI Rights Hotline. They have a website. They have a phone number. The Military Law Task Force within the National Lawyers Guild. We will put out the website and the phone number for that. A lot of the DoD instructions that have been listed, the rules for court martial that have been listed. Obviously, Jonathan Hutto's article, the No Sir documentary, Soldiers in Revolt, all of these we're going to put in the info section, because there is just so many nuggets of information here that are going to be really helpful in inspiring those of you who are trying to stand up to what could be a potentially fascist regime, and knowing that you are building upon the boots of your predecessors, and that you are not alone, as even though as terrifying and as scary as it can be. I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm just going to go around. People can just quickly tell us where you can be found. I know it's probably going to be where we already said you can be found, but James Brownham.
Yeah, for further contact with me, you can find my contact info at girightslawyer.com, and that's rights with an S at the end.
Amazing. Kathleen.
The Military Law Task Force.
Great.
We're at 619-463-2369, and we are happy to chat and to make sure that people who need lawyers are in touch with lawyers.
Amazing. Brad, you've mentioned it, but please let people know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If TikTok does go down January 19th, they claim that, the Supreme Court's looking at it. That is my main social media platform. But if it goes down, there'll be other means that we have a plan B of how we're going to move forward. But I'll put my email address out there. You can reach me at so Bravo, my last name, Berkowitz, at AOL.com. Or you can Google my name. I have a website, and, from my boxing years, there, you can find me many different ways. Just Google my name.
Right. Jonathan.
You can definitely Google me, and you can always find me through Continue to Serve. Just find Lindsay. She knows how to get me.
Find me. And then obviously Chris Lombardi had to drop off early, but she frequently writes about veterans for wagingnonviolence.org. And we will also put a link to her book, I Ain't Marching Anymore: Dissenters, Deserters, and Objectors to America's Wars. So you can always check that out. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us, taking the time away from your very, very busy schedules. And I appreciate all of the work that you have done and continue to do for this very vulnerable population. Thank you.